Good to see you. Yeah, great to see you, Jeff. Yes, I sure do.
Formerly Boeing, but thank you again for doing this. It's
Thank
really
you.
a pleasure.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you all for coming. Really appreciate you all being here today. Excited to welcome you all to the National Security Institute's event, Filling the Vacuum, Harnessing Innovation and Securing Space. Just to give you a little sense of what we've got going on here at George Mason and with the Center for the Study of Presidency and Congress. We're proud to be partnered with CSPC, which is a terrific organization whose mission is to learn the lessons of history to inform leaders about initiatives going forward. CSPC has been a great partner with the National Security Institute here at George Mason University's Antonin Scalia Law School. We're proud to be partnered with CSPC. Congressman Glenn Nye from Virginia's 2nd District is here, the leader of CSPC, along with Chairman Mike Rogers, who I'll be interviewing today. So just to give you a sense of what the program is for today, Chairman Rogers and I will have a sort of a fireside chat for the next about 40 minutes or so. We'll engage with the audience with some questions. And then we'll have a little bit of time for a very short break. Then we'll bring up a panel of distinguished experts run by Brian Smith, who's out there in the audience, our former budget director of the House Intelligence Committee, and a number of distinguished folks from the industry and from government to have a chat about the topics we've talked about today. So with that, let me introduce Chairman Rogers, my former boss. Chairman Rogers served Michigan's 8th Congressional District from 2001 to 2015, where he was also the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, where I had the chance to work for him. He's represented Michigan's 26th District, also the Michigan State Senate, and has also worked, perhaps most importantly, as a special agent for the FBI in the Chicago field office, where he went after organized crime and public corruption between 1989 and 1994. Chairman Rogers is a graduate of Adrian College, where he earned a bachelor's degree in criminal justice sociology and served in the U.S. Army from 1985 to 1989. Chairman Rogers is also on the NSI Advisory Board, and I'm proud and excited to have Chairman Rogers here today. So thank you, boss.
I'm not sure if Jamil worked for me or I worked for Jamil. That's still up for discussion, I think.
So, boss, great to have you here. So we had this great report that came out of CSPC just this past few months ago, talking about the importance of space and space innovation. How did you end up coming to this issue? What was your experience at the Intelligence Committee that brought you to this issue? And why did you and Congressman Nye decide to partner on this particular topic?
Yeah, for me, it was the big event on the Intelligence Committee was in 2007 when the Chinese launched a kinetic missile and hit their own satellite. They were just showing both themselves and the world that they could do it. And they did hit it. I have to tell you, as a former FBI guy, we would call that a good shot, right? 18,000 miles an hour. I was all excited about that narrative until I met a physicist who said, "Sir, it's just a math problem. I don't know why you're so excited about this." So that kind of burst my bubble on that. But when we started going through the process, and then we started peeling that back, and we're looking at what the Russians were doing, certainly what the Chinese were attempting to do, and it was really smart. What we saw was a policy forming around going after what was one of the strengths of the United States military and intelligence services, which was space. You think about smart soldiers, smart ships, smart boats, smart bombs, all of that is enabled through space. Our GPS systems, both civilian and military-grade systems, allow us to do things that our adversaries can't do on the battlefield. And so what the Chinese were doing at that time was making this conscious decision that rather than build 6 or 8 carrier groups at $50 billion a throw, they were going to invest in going after what they believed was our Achilles heel. And that was the wake-up call for me. I had not, candidly, prior to that, and I certainly was knowledgeable about it, took all the briefs on it. Heather Wilson was a member of the committee then, and she kind of ran the space program off the committee. So I knew it was in good hands. I didn't spend as much time probably I should have early on. But once she decided to go off and do other things, which I'm still very mad at her about, by the way, that kind of fell to me, and I just dug in with a vengeance. And that was the catalyst to start saying on the committee, and certainly when I became chairman in 2010, we're going to have to figure this out. We are no longer the sole actors in space. We had lots of competition developing in space in ways that we hadn't anticipated. And that was going to impact the way we spent money, the way we defended our assets in space. So before it was, we're going to launch it, how long does it last? To, we're going to launch it, what happens if somebody really wants to take that thing out of orbit? Now we got another problem. How do we defend that thing? And as many of you know who are interested in space, you take technology off to put defensive systems on. The way we were architecting those big buses, it starts degrading your ability really pretty quickly to be able to meet our mission sets. Yeah. And so that's how we got started in it. And Glenn was on the Armed Services Committee. I don't know if he's still in the room, but we decided jointly that this would be the perfect task for the organization that was originally created by Eisenhower to provide off-the-hill advice and counsel on national security issues. So we thought this was something that wasn't getting the attention it needed. Yeah. And that's how this whole thing started off.
Yeah. Well, at an unclassified level, and I know a lot of the folks in this room have clearance and the like, but at an unclassified level, how bad is this threat to us? And what is it about our constellation, our national security constellation in particular, that makes it so vulnerable to these potential threats?
I think it's very bad. I think we are at risk of losing our dominance in space. I don't think we've lost it yet, but I think we're at risk if we don't understand what folks are trying to do in the offensive capability, kinetic capability, disable capability in space. And the slowness of our architecture is working against us. And remember, that architecture was built, and I'm talking about things like reconstitution, how fast can we go? What if they knocked out our GPS system, let's say, or at least significant portions of enough to cause us problems? How fast could we reconstitute? All of those kind of questions, we weren't coming to the right answer. And what happened was this big institution, a cultural institution of space, got developed, and it worked very well for the United States. We shouldn't degrade it. It worked very well. It allowed us to be the leader for 50, 70 years in space. I mean, it was great. The problem is the world's changed, and that we haven't adjusted to that change. And so that's why I think we're at risk, and why I think there are certain things we can do in the immediate future that can get us to either to maintain our superiority in space.
So let's talk about some of those things. One of the things you've recommended, that CSPC recommended in the report that you and Congressman Nye worked on, is this idea of a more robust, larger LEO constellation, right? Tell us about that, and why isn't the concern there, well, look, if you're putting a lot more stuff in LEO, that's reachable from Earth, right? Isn't that just as sort of targetable as other exquisite systems that might be in that same orbit?
Yes and no. So what our theory on this was, and by the way, this wasn't Mike Rogers and Glenn Nye talking. What we spent a year and a half, 125 different group meetings. We had 5 roundtables around the country. We brought in experts from government, new space. I hate to say old space. I always get in trouble when I say old space. But not new space. How's that?
Large contractors.
Yeah, exactly.
People
who've been in the space business a long time and know what they're doing, right?
So we have that historical knowledge.
Absolutely, and it's incredibly valuable. And the reason, by the way, you have every rule for mission assurance is something happened in the past, and then, of course, they probably heaped on too much to try to make sure that didn't happen again, because we're spending a tremendous amount of money. And so part of this was a two-pronged approach. One, how do you make it less interesting for our adversaries to start taking out satellites to accomplish their mission of either making us go blind or go dark or go deaf in space? And so we thought a couple of things. One, we weren't using commercial space in a way that was integrated in our national security picture in space. Why are we doing low Earth orbit from a national security perspective in the way that we were doing 20 years ago? Could we change that, right? When you go that high orbit architecture, it's important that's really the most expensive, exquisite systems that we have. I argue nobody better to do it than the way we've been doing it, and we ought to encourage that and find other ways to take advantage of that space, because we are uniquely positioned in the world to be able to put stuff up there.
You mean out of GEO?
Out of GEO.
Yeah.
That's effective. And with low Earth orbit, we have all of this new low Earth orbit competition coming in, private sector, that they're launching stuff now all day long. And when they're even doing the CubeSats are up, and the whole architectures around CubeSats, even if they have short lifespans, all of that's happening. And we thought, if we could do a couple of things. One, focus the resources that we have to spend on what we do really well, we being the U.S. government do really well, and our historic contractors, and then try to embrace the commercial sector in helping us solve this reconstitution in a hurry problem. It makes it less interesting for somebody to fire a missile and take 1 or 2 or 3 satellites out, or launch a satellite that's a satellite killer and uses different methods, many of which you can read about in public forums. Allegedly. To do bad things in space, right? And so we wanted to say, let's take away that equation. Right now it makes good sense for them to do it because they know it'll take us forever to get something up there that replaces it. And so that was the point of that. And if we could work in the other elements, so even mission assurance, is the mission assurance standards appropriate for what we're sending up in low Earth orbit that we want to send up something else pretty quick anyway? I mean, are we not taking appropriate risk for what the threat is? And our conclusion with talking to everybody, that it wasn't. Yeah. That we could probably do this a lot better and a lot faster. And one of the ways, by the way, is if we could find a rapid launch pattern, so an IDIQ kind of approach, where, okay, I don't get this. I'm a contractor. I missed that bid. We don't want you to go away for 10 years because the next project isn't 5 or 10 years away. We want you to get ready because there's another launch coming up next year. Right? Get ready. Come on, let's go. Get in the game. And so we think if you layer those conclusions of the report, and again, this is a work of a lot of people, smart people in space coming together with these conclusions, we thought we could do something much quicker to take away our adversary's position of, hey, we're gonna launch something that does something nasty in space.
So let's talk about the capability you're looking for, and then some of the applied ways you've thought about doing the report. So one of the capabilities you talk about is robust launch capability, rapid reconstitution. How does launch and rapid reconstitution, how do those two things work together, and what is the relevance of sort of our tradition of strong mission assurance and the need to sort of plan for long in advance and then and spend years and years and years and frankly lots of money, right? How does that compare to sort of this new idea of get a lot of things up there. If some of them don't go up, that's okay, but we'll get it up there quickly and we'll be able to replace it quickly with the latest technology. Does that make sense in this space? Because a lot of things we've talked about for a long time, part of the reason we have the programs of record we do are we need these exquisite capabilities. It takes a long time to develop them, to do them right. I mean, how often have we put something up that just didn't work exactly the way we wanted to, or we try to put it up and it doesn't get there, and then we spend all this money and time. We've had recent alleged examples of that, right? How do we deal with that problem, and how does rapid launch and reconstitution help with that, or hamper?
I think it helps.
Yeah.
And so what we have to do, and if we had the same mindset today that we did when we were trying to get the whole moonshot program off, we'd have closed it down, right? Had a couple of bad experiences, cost a lot of money, forget it, doesn't work, right? That's really, if you think about it, what the mentality is there. We have mission assurance that's, they call it the 5 nines, right? You cannot get it wrong ever. Now there are some systems where that makes a lot of sense. Honestly, it does. And let me back up. The largest share of the budget of at least when I was chairman, which the public number was about $75 billion, the largest share was space. People don't realize that, right? They think of CIA or NSA, and those are all expensive programs, don't get me wrong.
Okay, so not human, not SIGINT, but overhead collection.
Overhead, well, it was launch,
right.
Design, build,
right.
And then operational. Hugely expensive. So that you can see how people said, all right, it's really expensive. We're going to put a piece of equipment up in space, a bus up in space, that is really expensive and has some of the coolest stuff ever, right? And if you're a science geek, this was the best fun ever to look at all those systems going on these satellites, right? I mean, it was fantastic. It was fun.
I remember I had a lot of clearance. I remember the rooms I couldn't go in, or behind the other curtain, right, that you couldn't go see.
Really sensitive stuff.
And that's where they had the aliens, right?
Yeah, exactly. I've been to Area 50. All those 500,000 people that are going, I don't recommend it. I've been there. They do have one great bartender. He's got about 4 arms. Serves a wicked martini. I'm telling you.
Makes it really fast.
Really good. Yeah, he's so good. Always puts an extra olive in too, which is great. Thanks, Jamil. I got to be off track. So at any rate, that budget number is huge. What we think we can do is lower the cost of commercial integration, so it costs us less. And then if you have rapid launch, we're not going through these exquisite designs on how to fit it on rockets. You have a perpetual system where you know something's coming up. So the private sector gets in the rhythm, and more importantly, the government gets in the rhythm. And we think once you marry that rhythm, that tempo together, I would get out of the way. You're going to see some amazing things that we didn't even think possible today. In 10 years, you're going to go, oh, that's old hat.
One of the things we talk a lot about in the space discussion is this idea of maintaining this domestic capability and the industrial base when it comes to space, right? And the need to have these large programs of record that can be assured over 10 years, and the budget's going to come in, the money's going to come in, so we can sustain the base of technology here. But it seems like at least the CSPC report that you worked on seems just a different concept. The idea that if you're buying a lot of small things and rapidly launching them up and are able to, as we say in the tech industry, fail fast, right? That too can maintain a strong industrial base, and in fact, it can encourage an industrial base that has both commercial and national security applications. Tell us more about that.
Yeah, so part of the problem is a lot of that capability and intellect is isolated to certain companies that this is where you go to do this. And by the way, that was the way it was designed early on. And you wanted that kind of close circle of capability to launch certain pieces of equipment. And over time, what we think is that's changed. We're not saying do away with those legacy systems. What we're saying is we're going to focus on that. You're going to still do well financially on putting the right engineers and intellectual capital in a room to develop these next generation of systems. But we're also going to be a little wiser about when we send them and how we send them up. And we're going to start filling in the holes that we have with these other systems. So I think you get both. And now you have a whole cadre of private, outside of the big defense industrial base capability in the private sector. So when you do have a problem that's a little unique, it may be out of the box, maybe you can pick up the phone and say, you know what, guess what? We're going to need your help on this particular launch. Would you help us do this? Right. Would you partner with us to do this? And think about how we went to the moon. I mean, I was just reading today, 400,000 people participated in getting us to the moon. 400,000, right? And what we've done over time is we've certainly necked it down. We get why, right? And that includes everybody that was doing the programming back then on the limited computer capability they had. To the people turning the wrenches on them. But you think about that capability, and it was certainly dwindled down because we didn't need that many, right? Through efficiencies, we just didn't need 400,000 people to participate. My argument is, I bet we can double the people participating in space today and be just fine, and not drive the costs up, but actually drive the costs down, because they're going to have launch, they're going to have capability, they're going to have tempo. And that's where I think you balance all of that out. And you don't walk away from these legacy systems. I'm not one that believes just because it's big and cool and expensive, we ought to walk away from it. I think we need those capabilities, and we ought to invest in better capabilities in the future. Right.
So there's a place in your mind then for these exquisite systems. It's not that we're doing away with those. It's that we're creating a capability to, one, reconstitute that when it's unavailable, and two, sort of fill gaps with more rapid launch, smaller capabilities, more niche capabilities.
Completely.
Yeah.
I mean, I think the biggest national security threat in the world is if they actually went at commercial GPS, right? And somebody gets up in the morning, like 30 million Americans have the Starbucks app, and they go to the Starbucks when they're on the road and nothing happens, right? You're going to have 30 million uncaffeinated Americans walking the streets. I think this is a disaster waiting to happen. Right?
Fair. So talk to us a little about some of the mechanisms that you all thought made sense to help advance this. One is, obviously, there are culture changes that we've talked about for the better part of over a decade about culture change. So let's come to that on the back end. But on the front end, you talked about some very sort of granular changes to contracting, to the way that we think about acquisition. One of the things is you mentioned earlier, it's this concept of IDIQ. And so the concept there, as I understand it, is that you get a bunch of folks on contract, available for contract, and then they compete for individual task orders. Tell us a little bit more about that and why that makes a difference versus the traditional compete for a contract, get on the contract, and then we deal with it then.
Yeah, and part of that was the industrial base question as well. So once you do that, right, and I lose, I bid, and we go through this massive project. I mean, these bid processes are unbelievable.
Well, and challenges and disputes.
All of it. And then everybody sues everybody when it's done because, whatever. And so this is the part of the system that we all learned. It's all built into time and cost into these programs, including the after when if I win, it's still going to cost me X.
Which is why these numbers are so high.
Completely. And it's driving costs up. And we're not allowing companies to take risks to stay around to wait for the next one. And I think we're doing ourselves a disservice in this era. So the idea of this was, and it came out of these meetings, I'd love to take credit for this. It really came out of these meetings for folks who have been through this process over and over and over again that said, hey, what if we put a group of folks together? Let me back up. You have everybody bid for it. You find the best qualified companies to bid for a certain number or period of time of launch.
And not necessarily lowest cost here.
No, not necessarily.
And capability matters too.
Quality matters. I think quality matters in space. You don't want to throw a bunch of junk up there anyway. But it's not like you can go up with a wrench and fix it. If it's up there and not performing, you got a problem. And so what we learned through that process and talking to these folks is it would make so I lose the first bid. So I'm part of the 10 companies that get into the IDIQ. I know this is good for 10 years. I missed the first round. I didn't get it. Company A got it, but I'm company B. Well, that doesn't mean I take my toys and go home. It means I'm starting to plan because I know there's going to be another launch next year, and I want that bid. And so I'm keeping my people. I'm keeping the talent. You'll have some drifting back and forth. It's inevitable. But I'm keeping the people engaged in this fight for the next contract because I know I'm going to get something. Unless I didn't deserve to be one of the 10 in the first place, you're going to get a launch because the tempo is so great over the next few years. Keeps our industrial base, I think, stronger. I think it attracts people finally into the space launch business, right? Like that's what I want to do. We need all that talent coming in to space and aerospace industries. And to me, it worked on all of those levels, and it made complete sense to me. We do this for other contracts because they're big and they're complicated, and you don't want talent to drift away. Perfect. Why don't we do that in space? Why don't we allow them to keep that talent? And by the way, it's great for recruiting around campuses. I know I've got a contract. You're going to build something that goes to space. How cool is that, right? We got to re-inject that cool factor back in aerospace. Yeah. And
I want the audience, guys, be thinking of your questions. We're going to talk for another 5-10 minutes, and we'd love to have questions from you all. So be thinking of what you might want to ask. I have to be fair. One of the things that we've heard recently is there's been a lot of turnover, and I don't want to avoid hard questions. Been a lot of turnover in the space program recently at the top levels of USAF. Secretary Wilson, of course, being the most prominent, but there have been a number of other folks in the Secretary's office. What challenges does that turnover present in terms of some of the reforms and stuff that you've talked about? And I want to talk about culture too, but in particular, what about this issue of leadership change?
Yeah, obviously it's not helpful. Anytime, and if it was just the Secretary of the Air Force, you might be able to bump through that. But this is getting to kind of operational decision makers. And that's never helpful. It's never helpful in any organization when you have that significant of leadership turnover all at one kind of swoop. And I think it will set us back. I think we're going to spend more time now fighting about, whose inbox gets what piece of paper. That's just never helpful when you're trying to outpace our adversaries who don't have this problem, right? I don't think China for 1 minute is worried about trying to get their next launch up and running, and they don't care. Nobody's suing because they didn't get a contract in China. I guarantee it, right? So we've got, and I'm not saying we walk away from our democracy. Matter of fact, I call it the democracy tax, right? I happily pay the democracy tax. But it does mean that there's some encumbrances in this process that we have to get through. When you have that wholesale turnover, all of the energy that we had working with the administration, we're working with Congress in a bipartisan way. I know that's bad. You're not allowed to say that anymore. But it was starting to get traction, and we're worried that we're going to lose a little bit of that oomph in the administration. And by the way, the folks that are paying bills and signing the back of paychecks for this stuff, they have to keep going. It's not like they can stop and whine in their coffee for a minute. They don't have that luxury to do that.
So, a lot of this is about culture change in the Air Force, culture change in the space buying community, whether that's NRO or NGA or, CIA, DOD, right? There's a lot of cultures that we're talking about here. And I want to go back to something that you mentioned earlier just a second ago about bipartisanship, right? One of the things that when you came into the House Intelligence Committee and you and Congressman Ruppersberger came together to figure out how to make the Intelligence Committee work better, right? You engendered a massive cultural change there at the committee, both with the staff but also with the members who had long been used to, let's just be candid, being at each other's throats and not really moving the ball forward. How did you engender that culture change, and what does that teach us about how to think about culture change in the larger space enterprise? I want to talk about also what kind of culture change we need, but first, I'd be interested to know, how did you and Congressman Ruppersberger manage to engender what was ultimately a massive change amongst a group of politicians that have been used to sort of fighting it out, and not really moving the ball down the road?
Yeah, I mean, we first of all, he was a former prosecutor and I was a former FBI agent, so we had a lot of fun with that. And we just decided up front, before we had our first public meeting of anything, once he was announced and I was announced, that we were just going to sit down and talk it through. And so we decided in that meeting that national security was more important than either political party or our personal futures or not futures. We just thought we were losing time, precious time, when I didn't believe we had it. He didn't believe we had this time to kind of, it's a technical term, dink around on fighting about silly things that were ending up in these budgets. So we just had that agreement up front. And then what we decided was, and this was pretty unusual, I would never issue a subpoena without him. I had full of subpoena authority. I could have done it any time as chairman. That's just the way the rules are. I would never issue a subpoena if he didn't sign off on it, number one, right? Before anything started, we didn't know what we were going to engage in, obviously. But I just said, if we do this and we act as partners, not two different parties, we could probably get a lot done. And we had, we thought the same on a lot of issues. And we also did, if you recall, we made the staffs brief together on the budget, and that first one was painful because they just weren't used to doing that, right? And there was a lot of gotcha that used to go on in the budget processes there. And once you're sitting at the table with somebody, it's a lot harder to kind of pull the sheet out from under them when you're briefing these numbers. And what we found is that just sent the message that we had a different culture on the committee, that we were going to work together. Didn't mean you couldn't disagree. It didn't mean you couldn't have dissent. It didn't mean you couldn't fight like hell on whatever issue you passionately believe in. All of that happened. But at the end of the day, we argued we were going to come to a conclusion. And I'm not always going to win, and you're not always going to win. But let's put the national security of the country first, and I bet we'll get to a lot better place. And I over that time, I think that's why people look back at that period, and it was really that culture of bringing everybody together to say, we're going to do this and we're going to get it done.
Yeah. So on the culture question and how we think culture might need to change, I work at a cybersecurity startup today. You're on the board of that startup. You're working on a number of other sort of business enterprises. In the industry that you're in now, outside of Congress and outside of the DoD and Intel community, what is this idea of failing fast and failing often, and why does that matter so much? And how can we really bring that to bear on an enterprise and, frankly, a government that for so long has thought, look, failure is a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I get punished. I don't get promoted. I don't get rewarded if I fail. So I need to do everything I can, whether it's mission assurance or the like, or even, frankly, engaging in low-risk practices and not pushing the envelope so that I can get that next step and that next move up. How do we change that culture fundamentally now that you've seen it happen in industry and you've seen that fail-fast culture?
Yeah, I mean, that you cannot succeed in the high-tech business today if you don't have a fail-fast mentality. If you're not out there trying things and putting a little money in your R&D that might not go anywhere, you're not going to win. You will not win. Good news is highly competitive. This is a good thing. It means you better get out there and get on that track and get running, or you're not going to make it. And I've seen a lot of companies who are a little hedge their bets and they don't make it for that reason, not because their technology isn't great. Anyway, side story. It's hard to do that in government for exactly what you said. There's an old saying in tech that is now going away, but nobody got fired for hiring IBM. And right, it was safe, it was easy, even if they weren't the most innovative and they were close but not there. And IBM is a great American company, and it's had some great years, and it's had some years where it feels like it got lost in the wilderness for a few years. And so, but that old saying was, I don't care if their tech wasn't all as good as the other stuff. Nobody got fired for hiring IBM. And so they would take the risk on hiring IBM versus a new technology. And it was hard to break through that in the private sector, and I think that has now changed. And in the government, it's going to be nearly impossible, but Congress has to be a part of this solution. If you fail, you're a director of Agency X, and I say, I'm going to take a chance on this company, here's why I took the chance on the company, And you know what? It went wrong. It didn't work. If Congress hauls you up and calls you every name in the book and says how horrible you failed, and what an embarrassment you are to the U.S. government and everyone I represent, and I'm going to tweet about it and tell the world how bad you are. If we don't get over that, we will never get it fixed. Because even inside government, you can push the envelope a little bit. You'll still run into bosses that are less inclined to be, because they think that's their ticket to the next one, is not having any problems. That can change, but it won't change as long as you have this outside influence that is just eager to find a failure. And so Congress has to stand up, and they need to come to a better understanding about what their role is in government. And yes, it's to provide oversight to find misdeeds, but it is not to punish behavior that it's designed to push the envelope to get us to the next place. Yeah. And we've lost that in Congress. Yeah. And I'm telling you, if we don't change that, we're just going to lumber through this thing for another decade. Yeah. And unfortunately,
as our adversaries get better.
Oh, they're getting better. They're getting a lot better. They're stealing our stuff, which is pretty good stuff to steal. And they're also self-innovating now based on information they've stolen. Chinese are really good at this, and right, you can watch them leapfrog in some of their capabilities, where 20 years ago, if you'd have told me they had capability X, I would have said, you're nuts. They're not going to have that for 50 years. Guess what? They've got it now. And so that's what worries me, is that we're in this notion that, I don't know, this is the Industrial Revolution meeting the digital revolution. And I'm not sure who's winning right now. And I think we're taking all the wrong lessons from the digital revolution and using it for social media to beat the snot out of my neighbor because I don't like my neighbor, versus the good things that can happen with this digital revolution.
Well, as much as that makes me want to ask you about government by Twitter, I'm not going to do it. I would like to turn to the audience for some questions.
I'm opposed. For the record, I'm opposed to government by Twitter.
Audience questions, sir, down here in the front.
You talk about the satellite, the swarm satellite. Let's suppose that tomorrow we have a new Congress that is working together, both sides of the aisle. What are the problems to move completely from the model of today of big satellites to a completely swarm satellites model?
Do you want me to repeat the question, because I know, Mike? So, yeah, if I could just summarize. As I heard your question, it was, how do we, if you could assume a world in which we had a bipartisan Congress and great working relations between Congress and the executive branch, how would you compare, and how do we move from a big satellite model to a swarm satellite model?
I don't think that's as difficult as we think, as long as we can get over the mission assurance mission set, and then what those architectures look like for resilience. If you can answer both of those questions up front, again, we're all assuming that we're all getting together and we love each other and we're proud of, all of that.
Which unfortunately isn't the case today.
No, I don't. I'm unfortunately not, right? We're always trying to find something wrong versus what's right, unfortunately. And so let's say we're all looking to find something right, and we understand that our Russian adversaries, our Chinese adversaries, our Iranian adversaries, and our North Korean adversaries are working to try to undermine our strength in space.
Imagine if that were the case.
Yeah. Imagine if that were the case, right? So I do think you could get there. I'm not completely sold that swarms in and of themselves are the answer, but multi-layered, because with new technology, we're going to be able to slice streams of data coming off of what would normally have been a common communication satellite in ways that I'm not even sure I understand yet how that could impact our ability to make sure that losses it would be nearly impossible to take us offline. You might hurt us, you might take us off for an hour or two, but you're not going to kill us. And so that, I think, could be a new technology that's getting ready to get laid on satellites that I'm pretty excited about. I always try to think through the strategy of what that looks like, and I'm not sure I'm there yet. So I think by the time we get together, the technology we're applying to what we understand as current architectures, and then multiple layer LEO architectures, I think we could get a lot done in a hurry, and it would completely cause our adversaries to have wasted their money, and I am for that. Sure.
Because if you move for a swarm satellite system with layers, I agree with you, even expeditionary force can launch their satellites if they lost cover.
Yeah.
They just can launch, put in space at once for their own use by expeditionary force. So destroy whatever you want.
Yeah, listen, I'm for throwing stuff. I know there's people who don't like that approach, but I'm for having stuff to throw up and building some reserve to throw up. Again, you're trying to take away the adversary's decision that it's a good idea to take out our GPS satellite or whatever it is. And so I'm for swarms, I'm for slicing, I'm for having a little extra reserve, build them, maintain them, and then send them up in the next go route, and then put some new ones in there ready to go. So that you want to get aggressive in space, that's great. We'll overwhelm you.
It is crazy that when we have a failure, we have to wait, that there's some lag time before we don't have anything reserved, in part because they're so expensive, so
really
large,
expensive, and by the time, they'll argue, I build it, and by the time it goes up, it's out of date. I don't need that stuff anymore, or it's not the best stuff. And I argue we all did. We ought to be throwing up the best stuff. Oh, and by the way, the one problem related to that, if I may, is that this used to drive me nuts when I first got into understanding space and how it worked and how much money we spend where and how, is that the people who were sending up the equipment, the really cool stuff. So we would go through the bidding process. And they were like, yeah, let's throw X on there. That's awesome. And let's throw Y on there. And the bill would come due, and you'd go, wow, that's a little bit overdone. And you realize, guess what? The people who were adding the technology were not the people paying for it. Funny how that works. When stuff is free, I want everything. I want the Cadillac with every bell, with every whistle. If it's free, I want it all, man. Well, we didn't quite get it done before we left, but we were trying to merge that. So you say, yeah, you want to put it on there, you come tell me where that comes out of, right? Because this is how much money we have to spend. You tell me what the best stuff is for this amount of money. I'm not even sure we're there yet, because there's just a disconnect between the people who put it on and launch it and the people who have to pay for it. And I argued, put them in the room. There ought to be a guy that pays for it or a gal that pays for it sitting in the room going, okay, that's great, boys, but that's expensive. How are you going to pay for that? What are you going to take off?
Ma'am.
Well, regarding these current statements, the EU's Galileo navigation satellites have been down since the 11th of July. This is a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
And this is important. What I'd like to know and hear from you, Chairman Rogers, is what kind of guidance and advice, if you were still the chair of the HPSC, would you give your leadership? Would you give the president about this issue and this concern? And what can we do to help ensure that our GPS systems don't go through the same trauma that Galileo is going through right now?
Yeah. There are some other places they can make some of that up, to be fair. But again, I would be on this rapid reconstitution. This would be, to me, the time to do it. And here's the good news. If you unleash some of these private companies, you'd be surprised how fast they could fix this problem. But we're caught in this old system of launch and review and mission assurance, right? And these are things that we can change in a relatively short order if you get everybody playing on the same team. But it does take that. And it takes focus on it, right? I mean, if you think about what the focus is, and all the conversation and all the command energy in space is not about how to fix these problems. It's about another issue of which we did not deal with in this report, by the way, of what the organization looks like. We didn't deal with that. But if you think about where all the command energy is and where it's going to be, it's not on fixing these problems. It's on whose inbox does problem A go into. And I always think if we're doing that, we're losing. I think we're going to be behind. Sir.
Hi. Question that is actually more relevant now after you mentioned the private sector and innovation than when I first thought of it. ITAR. So how do you feel about ITAR and its impact on limiting the market size that American companies can go after globally compared to foreign companies, and how that impacts what they're able to create?
Yeah, and so, I've fully evolved on ITAR and of like issues in this sense. So I was before, think of, my FBI experience and experience as chairman is let's not lose really important technology. I don't want to advance our adversaries. Why would we do that? We are being outpaced by our adversaries. and I'm not sure we're advancing the cause. So I still think we should be judicious on how and what kinds of technology that we're allowing into the open marketplace, but it's not probably the list that we have today. And we have to be faster at it. We need to. You can't take as long as it's taking to come to the conclusion that a piece of equipment or a piece of technology that is already up in space by another foreign company is somehow going to cause a problem in the marketplace, right? It's like it's there, it's operating. We're not advancing anything. We're just too, again, that's that culture of being too slow and being too concerned and everyone's wringing their hands. And again, I'm not saying I wouldn't have been there 10 years ago of like, oh, no, you can't share anything with anyone. I just don't think that's effective, given the pace of our adversaries. Now, there are some pieces, as you would know, you don't want to share. You don't want to give the Chinese a 5 or 7 year leap in their technology capability, or the Russians, or the Iranians, or the fill in the blank. That, to me, we have to be really protective of. But that list is getting small, and then we're going to innovate within that list. My argument is make it a small list, protect it, and then allow our commercial folks to crank stuff up in a way that protects that technology and allows us to be market leaders in the world.
So we have time for about 2 more questions. So I saw a question over here, and then right down here in the front, man.
How you doing, Mr. Chairman? I kind of scratched at this before in a different study that you were involved with, but you pointed out that our programs are decades plus long, and then that's a complicating factor. I think similarly a complicating factor is that at best, how we as a government invest in those programs and invest in the supporting technologies of those programs may at best be 5 years. Where I'm talking about a FIDEP, right. And a lot of other agencies within the a lot of other entities within the interagency, they roll year to year or on a 2-year cycle. What are your thoughts on trying to get at least some of our more strategic oriented needs filled through maybe a 10 or a 15-year type budget forecast, so that we can kind of survive, if you will, the 2-year congressional cycle, the 4-year presidential cycle, assuming that we might even at some point go where, we got 4-year presidents, and that's really going to complicate things rather than an 8-year president.
Yeah. I don't know how you fix this in Congress, candidly. We tried some small reforms on tightening up the intelligence or agencies outside of the intelligence community, I'm trying to be careful how I say this, that were engaged in intelligence activities that we looked at and said, we call that cut and paste. That's not intelligence activities. And so we tried to say, let's reform it. And the money you're spending is you're wasting your money, but we'll happy arrange it that you get all the information you need. But why do you have this extra money? Remember, we were going through all the budget, and we ended up finding $6 billion in waste, by the way, $6 billion. That we took out of the budget and didn't impact mission. So I dispute this notion that anyone that advocates for a reduction in costs is somehow destroying the mission. I just don't believe it. And we did it in a bipartisan way. I don't know how you'd get there. And the point of that story was we couldn't get them to agree on any of that. It was all about jurisdiction, and this is mine, don't move my cheese. And I think that's
what I'm getting at is
the long-term strategy plan.
Right. I mean, we have to provide the funding line, but we can go fast as we...
I agree, but get Congress to set aside 10 years of budget money and you've won a prize. Right? Because again, nobody wants to get caught in that cycle. They come in as chairman, let's say the House flips in 2 years. And the new chairman comes in and the new chairman said, that's not how I would have done it, so I'm changing it. I mean, that's not helpful, but we've seen this in government now of the last 4 administrations and Congress. Everybody comes in and wants to change something because the other team did it. And so it's just really not healthy. I just don't know how you get there until you get a serious cadre of members who are saying, this is about national security, and I'll fight this year, next year, the following year. We tried this with biodefense. Anna Eshoo and I, a Democrat from California, we put together the bill on BARDA, the Biodefense and BioShield bill. And for the first time, we got $5 billion set aside for multiple years because we couldn't find anyone willing to invest in antidotes and remedies and all of that. And it lasted for about one term. And we'd go back, and then the whole goal was how do you go back and let them, because everyone wanted to take the money for something else, right? If there were an attack, I'd have had $80 billion. But there wasn't an attack, so the $5 billion we tried to get ahead of the problem, we could never, to this day, it's not fully funded. And so, how long has that's been? 7 or 8 or 10 years now, and we still have a biodefense problem. I mean, there's any expert you'll talk to knows that there's a biodefense. We have a biodefense problem. Huge problem, and we can't get it funded because it doesn't seem like it's all that sexy, right? Until it happens, then it's a disaster, and we're going to throw ungodly amounts of money and waste a lot of it.
And legislating a crisis never
Never is a good idea.
So, last question, ma'am, right here.
Sir, my name is Kathy Schwab. I have like two focuses. One is rapid acquisition, and the second is a problem with this IDIQ. I worked in the NRO when it was before it became the new NRO, when we were special projects. And back then, we could contract for new technology. If somebody came to me with a new idea, I could get them on contract in 2 days. It was so easy. We had CIA authorities. It was so easy. And then when we became the new NRO, we had DOD 5000, and it was so hard to do contracting. I think that's where we lost our edge. Is that we need to continue acquisition reform. And it becomes such a big problem with acquisition reform. I think that's what's really hampering a lot of our ability to invest in new technology and put it up in space quickly. I ran one of the major payload programs in the NRO, and we got things up fast, and we launched, and it was fast. And it was just because we're stuck with this DOD 5000 and all the acquisition morass that has come about that has made it too difficult, that I think. And the second thing is I worked on a $700 million IDIQ contract, and it takes a year plus to get those IDIQ contracts set up. And then you're stuck with, say you've got 5 big contractors. Well, you're stuck with those big 5 contractors for 5 years, and you're not getting the best technology. You're not going to get innovative small business, small companies that are going to be your commercial satellite people because you're stuck with 5 biggies that are going to be the same people. For every time you have a source selection for a new idea, those are the 5 contractors you're stuck with. So you're not, it may be a good idea, but I think we need to keep bringing new technology in and the new commercial space guys. You're not going to be able to do that, in my vision, with an IDIQ contract.
Yeah, and we heard this argument through the process, and I'm not saying it doesn't have merit. The problem is there's no real good way for them to, they're already competing against the big guys as it is, and that presents a disadvantage. And I would argue anyone tells you it hasn't looked at the system, right? It's, as you know, it's a disadvantage competing against those big companies, especially if you're new space, right? They want to say, well, how many launches have you done over the last 30 years? Well, I didn't exist 30 years ago. Okay, that's not good, right? So what we were trying to do is could we find a way to allow them to get contracts of which they could participate? And, what happens in these IDIQ contracts is somebody wins and they need a little help on X or Y or Z, they go out and find one of these other companies and bring them in. And that's how we thought we could get new technology. So I thought it was worth the risk given this big morass. The other thing that we tried to do, and I agree with acquisition reform, I think it is absolutely broken. It is completely broken. You could spend as a member of Congress 20 years and not work on any other issue other than acquisition reform.
And not necessarily succeed.
Yeah, and probably not succeed, right? Because you got to get at least a couple of people to agree with you. It is, and I don't know how we get our arms around it. So that's why we thought we'd get around it in another way. That's why this IDIQ and then tempo, right? In the old days, if it was an IDIQ, you had one contract and then maybe 5 years or 7 years or 10 years, you get another contract. Our argument is build tempo in. Guess what? We've got a contract this year for this satellite constellation or satellite or suite of technology. Next year is another one. So if you don't get this one, get back on your horse. Something's coming. Oh, by the way, the next year something's coming. And what we were hoping to do was not necessarily change the commercial folks. We know where they're at. It's to change the people who are doing the acquisitions, to let them understand the game has changed. We are in fast mode. You're either going to be in fast mode or you're not going to make it because you got another one coming. What are you going to do? right? And so we thought that that could help influence the government's tempo and get to that culture change of, because they're competent people as long as we give them the rules to be competent people. And I argue we've given them rules that makes it look like they're incompetent because they're following the rules that we gave them because something bad happened 10 years ago in an environment that doesn't even exist today, but they're following that rule. Well, of course you're going to look incompetent. There's some really good, bright people in this field, but we have not unleashed them on the problem. My argument is let's unleash them on the problem and then get out of everybody's way, including the commercial folks. That's what we were hoping to accomplish. It's not perfect. There are some risks, no doubt. But we haven't seen, through all of that, I had not heard any better idea how to get this thing moving other than acquisition reform, which we support. Matter of fact, CSPC did a pretty lengthy report on this. And it'll make you pull your hair out. As a matter of fact, you'll be mostly crying or drinking scotch all day at how depressing it is to try to get this thing moving to where we can actually compete with the rest of the world. And remember, the rest of the world doesn't have all these, they don't have guardrails. I mean, India doesn't care, right? They just know they want this industry to survive, so they're going to make it survive. China they don't have rules or morals in their application of weapons in space or fill in the blank. They don't care. Right, and we go through all these moral issues, and as I said, it's the democracy tax that we ought to gladly pay, but we ought to understand how we improve its use if we're going to have to pay that tax.
Well, on that happy note, thank you, and join me in thanking Chairman
Thanks,
Rogers.
everybody. Thanks, everybody.
So we'll take a 5-minute break. We'll switch out the panels, and then we'll get started with the panel.
Thanks, boss. Appreciate it.
it's very important, but
guys
unless
gonna
we
see
start
the
thinking
Saturn
about
V projected on the Washington Monument?
I'm going to, yeah.
Architecture as a whole,
I think we're on.
we're going to cripple ourselves to one specific solution. So our proposal, obviously, I mean, call me biased, is focus on platforms. It's very good that we have as many launch vehicles as we do. It's very good that prices are decreasing, that flexibility is now, is now at the forefront of everyone's minds. Rapid acquisition, that's all very good. The recommendations of CSPC are perfect and exactly. Oh, really? Oh, that's great. So it is a hot mic. Great. Good to know. I'm going to go in there. Thank you. It is hot.
Sorry about that.
No, it's fine. I was just giving my. Well, it's like everyone can already hear me. Looks like I've already given my pitch. Cool. I don't need to talk, right? Yeah, that's great. That's all I got to do.
Waiting for Jamil to kick it off.
Has everyone seen the Apollo 11 movie in IMAX? If you haven't, you should. Yeah, there's a shortened version playing at Smithsonian Air and Space. It's really good. Really good. The footage and the sound is unlike anything that you'll see on TV or anywhere else. It's all been restored. It's pretty impressive.
You feel it shake right here like you do with a real launch.
Oh, the liftoff sequence is slow-mo, so you get to full effect. And it's just amazing.
I'm looking around the room. Has anyone been to a Saturn V launch?
7.5 million pounds of thrust.
Looking around there.
So we used to live in Melbourne, Florida, and we talked to the people that lived there when Saturn V was launching, and they described it as unbelievable. Yeah, even more than Space Shuttle, which was the STS, which was 5 million pounds of thrust, and then you've got
Saturn was 7.5. Yeah.
7.5 for Saturn V, and Delta IV Heavy, 2.5. So I mean, it's 7.5 million pounds.
Wish I'd been there.
Okay.
When are we going to get to see an Electron in slow motion?
Yeah, you can go to our website. I think there's some good video there. Yeah.
Cool. I was just at Cape Canaveral, just at the Tourist Center this weekend, to see the Saturn V.
Okay, I think we've got ourselves herded back here into the auditorium and ready to go for the second panel. Just one admin note before we get going. We're going to handle the Q's and A's a little bit differently. So you all either have now or will get little index cards to be able to write your questions on and then pass them to the aisle, and then we'll take them that way. It's really my distinct pleasure and honor to moderate this panel of very distinguished gentlemen who represent both the U.S. government and the new space industry. And we have a key policymaker from the Air Force and then representatives from 3 of the most exciting new space companies out there. So the panelists are going to introduce themselves, and I'd like them to give just a real quick thumbnail sketch of your company or organizational responsibilities in that too. I'm Brian Smith. I'm a senior fellow at the National Security Institute, and before I came into that role, I spent over 30 years in the government in the intelligence community, the Air Force, the Office of Management and Budget, and then both houses of Congress as staff.
Very good, thanks. I'm Sean Barnes. I work for an organization called SAF-SP, or Space Policy. Work for the Secretary of the Air Force, providing the Secretary advice and counsel on all things space. We work very closely with OSD, with interagency partners, work a lot of international engagement kinds of activities, and quite frankly, very happy to be here.
Great. I'm Jeff Trauberman. I'm the Vice President for Government Affairs for a company called Vox Space, and Vox is the national security arm of the Virgin Space enterprise. We have Virgin Orbit that launches satellites and Virgin Galactic that launches people. So I'm glad to be here.
Lars Hoffman, Senior Vice President, Global Launch Services at Rocket Lab. We launched the Electron rocket out of New Zealand and soon out of Wallops Island, Virginia, about 3.5 hours from here. We also have a satellite bus called Photon, so you may have heard about that. That's pretty exciting. I was at SpaceX before this, 4.5 years, and before that in the Air Force for a career. Seems like a lifetime. Glad to be here. Thanks.
Cool. I'm Adrian Manjuka. I'm the Commerce Director at NanoRacks. At NanoRacks, we are a cool little company that works on space platforms. We've done everything on the ISS from building a space oven to bake cookies for astronauts to launching recently the DARPA Red-Eye satellite, which we're very proud of. So we do a little bit of everything. We've had experience 10 years now on the ISS. We're looking to build beyond that, and we've got some very exciting plans to build a platform from repurposed upper stages that I'll tell you a little bit more about later.
So a number of us have Air Force backgrounds or currently serve with the Air Force. And when I was leaving the Air Force, my commander, as I was leaving to come to Washington to a policy job, and my boss said, Lieutenant, there are just two kinds of jobs in Washington. There are people who ask questions and people who answer them. He said, your job will be to be one of the people that ask questions because it's a lot more fun and it's a lot easier. So at least for 1 hour here, I will have achieved that objective. Chairman Rogers and Jamil did, I thought, a great job of not just explaining the findings and recommendations of the Securing High Ground study, but also describing kind of the policy context that underpins all of that. And as I reread the study in preparation for this panel, I thought, in the study I see a category of what we should do and a category of how to do it. So in the what category, I think there's, if not unanimity, then a strong consensus for the kind of things we need. We need to really harness the innovation, agility, and cost advantage that are inherent in these commercial companies. We need to take advantage of coming proliferated LEO architectures. We need to be much faster to market, faster to space, enabling us to do tech refresh and keep our technology current. And especially for the government, to do a much better job with resiliency and reconstitution. So the what is pretty clear. The how, I'm not sure there's a consensus there, but if it is, it's somewhat tenuous because, as we heard from one of the questions, a lot depends on the details and the modalities of the how. So in the how, I saw three big ideas in the study. I saw swapping product model of procurement for a services model, and within that, the much discussed IDIQ, and the chairman laid that out really well, what that's about. So the qualifying vendors would then compete for task orders on the basis of best value. And finally, taking mission assurance and moving it from the product, the rocket launch service, or rocket launch, launcher, or satellite to the mission, and looking at mission assurance at a higher level. So with that, I'd like the panelists to talk about whether they think those how-to recommendations are on point, and if so, what do we need to do to implement those, especially for our Air Force panelists.
And for the companies, which of these ideas do you think would especially impact your companies and give you an advantage, and how that works out? So we're going to take it from Geo down into Leo now in terms of what that study means for the Air Force and what it means for 3 exemplar new space companies. So over to you all. Sean, you want to kick off?
Hey, yeah, Brian, thanks very much. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. But before I try to answer those sort of 3 distinct or interrelated questions, let me describe what I think is the relationship between the Department of Defense and commercial, just sort of writ large. And it certainly applies to space. So you've got a range of relationship with respect to how best to exploit commercial, and that goes from do I just buy as a service to buying as a commodity to using a capability that is designed commercially but for purpose built, to maybe potentially in the case of space, figuring out how to insert capability onto a otherwise commercial bus, to exploiting the fact that there's a commercial market and a commercial industrial base that then facilitates a defense purpose-built capability. So think of if I've got a factory of satellites that are being built, what does that allow me to do? So all of that is part of the spectrum of how we might exploit commercial space. But I think there's also an aspect of how does the Department of Defense, working with true regulatory agencies like the Department of Commerce or the FAA or the FCC, work to smartly have a regulatory framework that facilitates the development of commercial capabilities in such a way that it doesn't drive commercial capabilities to go to nations that might otherwise license and encourage behavior that, frankly, we don't find particularly valuable. And then finally, does the Defense Department have a responsibility to protect commercial space if that commercial space becomes part of our national infrastructure? And so I don't like to think about the relationship between the Defense Department and commercial anything, but in this case commercial space, to be sort of a unitary, easy thing to kind of wrap your brain around. So I say that as just basic context. Gives you a little sense of where I'm coming from. So first of all, I agree very much with Chairman Rogers' perspective regarding the fact that we ought to be moving towards a hybrid architecture. He didn't use that term hybrid, but I will. And in my mind, hybrid means that you're going to have some national security capabilities that are absolutely purpose-built. Some of those may be in GEO, some of those may be in other sorts of orbits, but they'll be purpose-built for national security capabilities. Those may or may not be big, expensive satellites, but they certainly might be big, expensive satellites. And so that is going to be part of what your architecture is. But part of your architecture ought to also be, again, that exploited commercial piece. And I am not certain as to which of those, or is it all of those that I described, from everything from as a service to buying off the line as a commodity to doing some ride share to exploiting the fact that the industrial base is there. I'm not certain which of those is the sweet spot or if there needs to be necessarily a sweet spot at this point. But I absolutely believe that we will be using some version of buying as a service at some point. So I think there's both a service and a purpose-built and a variety of pieces in between. When I think of the IDIQ model, it doesn't hurt my head at all. But I think IDIQ works really well when you have something that you're buying that looks like a commodity. I think it doesn't lend itself particularly well to complex purpose-built capabilities. And so as there are more things that look and can be purchased as commodities, IDIQ I think works really well. Right now there's some of that, but there's not a tremendous amount of that. And then finally, Chairman Rogers' perspective that he described in terms of mission assurance and the need to consider mission assurance at a mission level, I think is absolutely spot on. Now, that doesn't obviate the need to still do system level and capability mission assurance, because you get to a mission-wide mission assurance by understanding what your vulnerabilities and your susceptibilities are at a object level. But if you're buying if you're using a large constellation, if you've got 1,000 satellites, does that allow for some failure rate? Absolutely it does. But it's not quite as simple as just a numbers game as well. So there's aspects of that are a little bit more complex than one might think. So I think in general, Chairman Rogers has some really superb ideas, and I think the work that was done in the report lays out a number of really good ideas.
Thanks, Sean. Jeff?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. Well, I think each of those three ideas, the services model, the IDIQ model, and what I'll call the system-level mission assurance, are useful models where there is a commercial market out there utilizing those capabilities. The government would be foolish, I think, to sort of reinvent what's going on in the commercial marketplace for its own specific purposes. To your earlier question, I don't know that there's any specific competitive advantage, to my company particularly, but I think it's a practice that could be followed across the industry where there is a commercial market. And to Sean's point, if there is some particular or unique capability that is needed, in our case, we do air launch of satellites. We do them from any runway that can handle a 747. If the government decided it wanted some specialized capability, specialized ground equipment, some specialized orbital equipment, that might not lend itself as well to a services-oriented model for that component. Of course, you could price it into your services offering, but I think there may be a bit of a hybrid required. But again, where there are commercial capabilities that are being offered by companies, mine included, I think each of those three models makes some sense.
Okay, thank you. Lars?
Yeah, a lot of good points made earlier and already here with this panel, so I don't want to reiterate some of those good points. But what I'd like to do is, give a little bit of context. My experience over the last 4.5 years before joining Rocket Lab was with SpaceX, and we were working in the EELV program, Evolved Expendable Launch Vehicle program, which I always found kind of humorous because, in my opinion, and a lot of our opinions, Evolved was recoverable launch vehicle. So we were glad to see that move on into the National Security Space Launch Program. But there you're talking about satellites that are hundreds of millions of dollars to billions of dollars, and yes, they need high levels of mission assurance. How much is enough? That's debatable. But that mission assurance was important, and the government was fulfilling their role in performing that mission assurance on behalf of all of us, the taxpayers, to ensure that payload, that precious payload, that exquisite payload would get to orbit. Now I'm working in a realm of smaller launch vehicles, microsatellites, cube satellites, and it's a little bit different perspective. Some of them are very, sophisticated for sure and probably need some level of mission assurance. But a lot of them could probably be treated much like we treat our commercial customers. And so the other compare and contrast that I'd like to make is between the commercial customers and the government customers. Now, government customers, I want to make this statement right up front so that it's clear that the government is making good strides in becoming more flexible and more agile in terms of their procurement and acquisition of launch services. And so there's some good progress being made, but there's still a compare and contrast between our experience with commercial customers and our experience in dealing with government customers, be they civil or national security. So a commercial customer will reach out to us from anywhere from around the world. They'll contact us via email or phone call. They'll see us at a conference. And they'll say, hey, I have a payload. I have a 1U, 3U, 6U CubeSat. I have a microsat. I need to get it to an orbit. They may specify the orbit. They may specify some timing sometime during this 3-month period because there's some importance tied to that time period. And we'll say, okay, that sounds good. Let's get on a non-disclosure agreement so we can have a more detailed discussion. That happens almost on the spot. Literally, I can be at a conference and present a pre-signed NDA to a potential customer. They can sign it right there as we're standing at the booth, and we can have a more detailed discussion. Now, we'll take the specifics of their request and we'll pass it through our teams to review both on a technical level, business due diligence, schedule, to make sure that we can deliver what they're asking. We can do that within a day or two, and we can come back to them with a quote, and that quote is an offer. It's a firm offer in the form of a letter. It's a template. It's a 2-page template that I can make an offer to that customer. They can review it, and if they like it, sign it and say, yep, we're ready to proceed to contract. We can go to a launch services agreement, again, a template. If it's about 8 pages long, it's got terms and conditions in there, and we've had the specifics of their particular launch request. They can review that, and if they like it, or maybe they need to adjust the terms and conditions a little bit, we can do that and iterate on it, which we often do. And we can get to a signed contract within a matter of a week, 2 weeks. That's the commercial customer experience. With a government customer, even under a rapid acquisition, it can take months or longer. All right, so we're making progress with the government customers, but we'd like to see that progress continue and to understand that there's a spectrum of payloads here. Some that need to take longer through an open competition and source selection, and some that need more mission assurance, so they're going to be a little bit more complex and they're going to be priced accordingly for the additional services and so on. But there's also a lot of them that could just be rideshare and filling open capacity on launches that are already on our manifest, like a lot of our commercial customers. We've had a lot of these commercial customers come in the last month or two that are launching later this year. And I'd like to point out that I've had some government customers come in and we're able to do the same thing. It took a little bit longer, but they're still able to do the same thing. So we're making progress is what I'm saying. Now, the last little bit of compare and contrast I'd like to make. Why is there a difference between the commercial customer and the government customer? The government customer, as I mentioned earlier, is providing mission assurance, which is the government's insurance, essentially, to buy down risk on those launches. A commercial customer will go out and buy third-party liability insurance on an open market. There's a market out there for third-party liability insurance. Now, it would be nice if the government could go out and purchase third-party liability insurance on behalf of us, the taxpayers, to buy down that risk. They're not able to, but that is one of those things that if that was changed, that might then bring those two experiences a little bit closer together and offer the government more options to move fast and to accept a little bit more risk on those payloads, on those missions where they can accept a little bit more risk. So I'll stop there. That's just a little bit of compare and contrast in a recent experience I've had with the larger, more expensive, more exquisite payloads that we've launched with the medium, intermediate, and heavy lift vehicles under the ELV program and now NSSLP, and what I'm experiencing with Rocket Lab with commercial customers and government customers from around the world.
Lars, thanks for taking it down to what that means to your business on a daily basis. And we're going to do some more of that. Adrian, for Nanorox.
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thanks to our gracious hosts, NSI, CSPC, on what a day, the 16th of July, 50 years ago, the Saturn V launched to the moon. And some of you might have noticed I'm styling and representing things. Just got to be aware, guys. Very important.
Rocket science.
Heck yeah. But this is an excellent question, and as I said, NanoRacks is a space platform, space station company. So what I have to offer you is an analogous experience from the International Space Station, having worked with NASA, specifically NASA, but at many points, and now and into the future, we hope interfacing a lot more profoundly with the DoD. So. As some of you might know, we have an ongoing services contract with NASA that perfectly mirrors, as an analog, kind of some of the things we're talking about on this panel. It's an IDIQ. It's task order based. We treat, as a company, the government as a customer. And granted, there are a lot of differences between the way that a civilian institution like NASA would work as compared to the DoD. But the example holds for 4 or 5 years now. We've been getting dozens of task orders. By the way, we've launched 750 payloads, 250 small sats and CubeSats so far, many of those through the ISS, through a platform that requires an immense amount of safety and verification and mission assurance work. And that model has worked absolutely splendidly for us. The way that we've gotten through some of the issues that were raised on the brief conversation with Chairman Rogers were on-ramps. So there are methods through which we can get over some of this tyranny of the IDIQ that we've been talking about on the panel. And it's not just like you see a services menu and you have a CubeSat launch and then an internal pressurized payload listed and every other risk that we have to take, like what if they need a custom this or a custom that. God forbid they have propulsion from the ISS, because that's a lot more work, and rightly so. We're dealing with the lives of 6 astronauts, right? So we're not complaining about that work by any means, but it's just very important to remain cognizant of mission assurance. We've gotten around that problem by on-ramping new services, new customizable services. So if you need additional safety work, additional tag-ups to be performed, those are services with a fixed cost and fixed expectations done at a firm fixed price. That's what's so kind of profound, we think, about this model, what can make this such a strong model moving forward. So really couldn't agree more with the recommendations presented in the report, and really want to put a lot of emphasis on our view of transitioning this idea as the government of this behemoth that just imposes meetings and regulations into the government as a customer, and we're very comfortable in that space, and we hope that through discussions like this we can transition that model that we've been so successful with NASA on for the past decade into a model that also works with our defense customers. So.
Well, it sounds like the DoD could go to school off of NASA in some areas, and with Steve Scalise coming to the NRO with his extensive NASA background, I think there's a potential to kind of move some of that culture into consideration.
Absolutely.
In DoD. I want to follow up on a few things that we talked about in the opening round here. Sean mentioned the regulatory framework and possible changes in mindset needed. For instance, I look at a very stylized process for NOAA with imagery launches, but then who does regulatory review on SIGINT launches? I mean, it's the NOAA is a kind of a historical artifact of early days. So we'll start off with our industry reps. Are there any pieces of the regulatory process that you find particularly problematic? You're scratching your heads. It's a constraint or burden for you. Be interested in that. Anyone can start. We don't have to go in perfect order.
No, it's perfect. No, I mean it's improving. Well, let's put it that way. So, I mean, you're even hearing right now some of the licensing process is getting streamlined. The costs are coming down or being proposed to come down, and that's all good news because it really is all about opening up access to space. Rocket Lab's motto is opening up access to space to improve life on Earth. And really that's very broad, and it covers a lot of things from national security to commerce. So we're seeing some improvement, but even now we set a 90-day deadline for submitting our launch license and our payload license to the FAA. They can get it done more quickly, and they often do, but it still is that 90-day timeline that paces a lot of our launches. So it really needs to come down to something more like filing a flight plan for an aircraft. When we get to that point, when you're filing a flight plan for a standardized launch profile that's been done hundreds of times before, and that's not too far off. Honestly, that's just a year or two off. Then we really are opening up access to space. FCC is making some good strides as well. They've got a tough job because there's only so much electromagnetic spectrum, and they have to review and make sure that between ITU and FCC that they're reviewing and approving all of the requests. It's very high-value real estate, electromagnetic real estate. So they're doing their jobs, but looking for ways to improve or streamline all of these processes is going to enable that access to space and that access to all of the capabilities and all of the value that's available in space, whether it be LEO or other orbits.
Anyone else on
In our case, most of the regulatory processes are going quite well. One of the areas we're focusing on for the future is on the issue of international collaboration and the regulatory processes associated with that. As you can imagine, if you have a system that you can take a 747 aircraft to any runway in the world where you can launch a 747 can land and take off, that's very attractive to some international customers. It enables them to create, in a sense, an instantaneous space program that they may not have had before. We think that's a big value. They think it's a big value, but that's something you have to work through. Of course, the export process, what are you doing when you're taking a plane with a rocket, and what's their status versus vis-a-vis the United States and the export control. So it's something we're working through right now.
Yeah, fundamentally, for us, regulation is about being good stewards of some resource or another. So I think what you said, Lars, was spot on. I want to add to that orbital debris assessment and mitigation. As the company that's launched a lot of satellites from a fairly low orbit at the ISS, that's something we've had to be very cognizant of, and we expect to be cognizant of in the future. We hope that those regulations will evolve and grow as we move into an era of commercial space platforms. But that's something that we got to give a lot of thought to, and really those conversations are just beginning now.
Okay, thank you. So we've got two companies that provide agile launch services, and in some cases we're talking about turnaround of days, right? And probably working towards hours in the future. And then we've got a company in Nanorocks that is looking to make on-orbit use of existing real estate, second stages, upper stages. So we have companies that have inherent capability, I would think, for reconstitution, which is one of the key points of priority for securing a high ground study. I'd be interested in each of the company's views as to your ability to contribute to reconstitution, and then here's Sean's views on how you're thinking about working with companies such as these to make reconstitution a reality. So, anyone go?
As the odd one out, I guess I'll take a first crack at it. Listen, first of all, it's important to mention that at NanoRacks, we're incredibly grateful for the existence of commercial competition in the launch sector. We view ourselves, no doubt, as a customer, as a future customer of those services. Competition brings prices down, is good for everybody, and we acknowledge will be a key to resiliency in the future. I want to add a dimension to that conversation on space platforms and really how we plan to do space platforms. We're taking the repurposing of upper stages path, and I can get into a little bit more detail about that if anyone wants in the Q&A. But how we get there is immaterial to us. We think that path is interesting because we think it's more affordable. And in many cases allows us to make use of resources we already have. Why reinvent the wheel? Why build a new platform? But really what I want to talk about is platform specifically. So we take a look at the market and we say we have a lot of rockets. They're going to be very successful, we hope, in the near future, but what more can we we do with the resource of LEO and beyond once we get there, right? What do we do when we get there? If we don't square that circle as a commercial company, really as an industry, I think this whole discussion is kind of a moot point, right? CubeSats are great. Disaggregation is fantastic. It will be a key to the strategic future, but we have to realize that our adversary is thinking from the right, right? And I got that from CSPC, so thank you, Joshua, for that. I credit you. Our adversary is thinking from the right. What do you think the Chinese and Russians are thinking about having in 30 years? The Chinese are building Tiangong to be a commercial space station, and yet it is in part run by the military. Where is their mind? How can we answer to that? Right. So we're starting with this focus on CubeSats and small launch vehicles. But what about, for instance, orbital maneuvering vehicles? What about constituting satellites on orbit? What about building kilometer-sized solar arrays? And these sound like science fiction problems here, but I assure you I'm working with companies every day that are guaranteeing me they have TRL 5 to 8 technology that is capable of achieving this right now if only they had access to a space platform that was not the ISS and all of its associated safety and crew requirements. I mean, we're not going to have any off-gassing from a module on the ISS. We're not going to do absolutely anything to endanger the lives of the crew. And doing things like launching CubeSats that are propulsive, like building large arrays and things like that's not something, that's not a level of risk that we want to impose on NASA. So how can we get to a place where robotically uncrewed platforms can provide us a basis for that kind of innovation? And those are the problems that we're most interested in discussing. That's how I really want to help shift the paradigm of this discussion and also add that level of that new vector, that new approach to this problem of resiliency and redundancy on orbit, responsiveness in the place and exactly the time of need, with a need to launch resources to that platform, but not necessarily a need to launch the satellites from Earth initially. So would be very happy to talk more about that.
So I kind of think of LEO as, the potential of being the next internet. If you think back to the early days of the internet when it was just connecting academia and labs, and no one had any idea of where it would be today. LEO has that potential. There's untold applications when you establish a presence and persistence in low Earth orbit at multiple altitudes, multiple inclinations. You're covering a wide space that offers all sorts of territory to build applications. And so the key to unlocking that potential is that rapid, reliable, affordable access to low Earth orbit, and that's what our company was founded on, was to provide that. And so how do we do that? Well, we built the company from the very beginning to seek maximum opportunity to provide access to low Earth orbit. Our launch site in New Zealand, for example, can support up to 120 launches a year. So when you heard me earlier talk about hundreds of launches, I wasn't kidding. We have one launch pad there right now. We have authority to build 2 more launch pads there. We have a wide open airspace. There's one airline flight a week that we have to worry about. We do have to deconflict with the sheep that are grazing the field, but they've gotten used to us, so they don't bother us too much. And there's not a lot of seagoing traffic out there to deconflict, so we really have wide open space there to provide that access to low Earth orbit. Our launch pad at Wallops Island is up to 12 launches a year. So in terms of being responsive, in terms of being rapid, you've got that model in New Zealand. At Wallops Island, we're building an integration and control facility that can house multiple rockets in parallel that can be ready to go with a moment's notice and provide almost the launch-on-demand capability that the national security community has always wanted and that the commercial community will definitely want once they see it available. And so that's becoming a reality, and that's exciting. And we're opening up really a new era of access to space. And we're really just talking about low Earth orbit, but there's tremendous potential just in low Earth orbit. So that's just touching on a few aspects of what our company's involvement is in providing just what you were asking, Brian.
Well, Lars, national security launches have a notice to mariners before they launch. I guess you have a notice to sheep and shepherd.
Yeah, we give them notice, yes.
Bad joke.
Yeah. I gotta try to keep up. See, now you laugh at Chairman Rogers' jokes. You're not going to laugh at mine.
So
your turn, Jeff.
Well, so great. So there's everything that you've heard before is great, and I want to echo the comments you've heard. I think you asked specifically about reconstitution.
Yeah.
And I think that's an element of a broader category of topics that we called recently resiliency. How do you, and reconstitution is one aspect of it, not the entire aspect of it. I think, again, focusing on the capabilities we're offering, we're looking sort of a tactically responsive space launch. How can you launch a satellite on very, very short time frames from a variety of different locations with all the advantages that confers? Maybe not give a lot of notice externally that you're going to conduct operations in a particular area. And we think in the aggregate there are great advantages to the military in doing so. We didn't design our system with our commercially for the military. It just so happens that those attributes that our commercial customers can take advantage of can also apply to the military. And so I think there's going to be growing realization that these kinds of capabilities are going to be useful to the military. In fact, recently the Air Force, I'm sure Sean is certainly aware of this, it put out an RFI about Rapid Space Launch Initiative, and we think these kinds of things are beginning to gain a foothold in there. I really want to commend the Air Force for thinking about that. It's not going to be easy or overnight, but I think there's going to be this gradual shift to where tactically responsive reconstitution really become part of the greater lexicon that's used within the national security community.
And Jeff, you have capability to take what size payloads to LEO?
Well, our target payload is 300 kilograms to a 500-kilometer sun-synchronous orbit. So think a large commercial, to use the appliance analogy, a large industrial refrigerator or 2 washing machines.
Yeah, okay.
On the 747 in the launcher one.
And Lars, you're talking about dormitory-sized refrigerators instead.
Yeah, microsats.
What appliance are you?
Microsats and CubeSats.
And as I understand it, the payloads are encapsulated by the customer and then just shipped to you as...
They can be. There's a couple of options. They can encapsulate at their facility. They can send the payloads to our Huntington Beach facility where they can be integrated onto the payload plate and encapsulated and shipped, or they can be sent directly to the launch site, which is the typical mode that they choose. And then we have a clean room there, and we go through the whole integration and checkout process.
Similarly with us, I mean, when I used my appliance analogy, we could also launch aggregates of smaller satellites as well. And so we have integration capabilities that we're planning on doing in Long Beach in California. And we can also do some operations at the airfield at which we're going to be operating as well.
So, Sean, we've got teed up for you all this capability for rapid reconstitution, whether by air, 747s, or fast turnaround Electron launchers, or taking advantage of second stages. So how is the Air Force? How are you, as the Air Force, looking to take advantage of this capability and work it into your doctrine and programs?
Yeah, thanks much. So the way Jeff described reconstitution as a subset of resilience, I think is the same way that the Air Force sees that. In reconstitution, if I didn't have a vibrant commercial industry, would be prohibitively expensive. And if the Air Force unto itself said, I want to set up a requirement for a reconstitution capability, the kinds of challenges that we would have is, well, I have to have something to reconstitute. So that means I'm going to have additional copies of whatever that satellite is. And just as an example, as we had additional copies of our weather satellite, or DMSP, that cost us somewhere in the neighborhood of $90 million a year to store. So it doesn't end up being
So expensive to store that we never launched.
That's exactly
right?
well. In that case, yes.
Yeah,
But
and
we
that-
stored a number
that-
of DMSP satellites, right?
Yeah.
So I have to have something to store. Then I've got to have the ability to launch it rapidly, and that's very expensive. So if there was no commercial industry that was growing that provided that capacity and capability, I would say that reconstitution we would think about very differently. And reconstitution would probably mean more like, I've got some additional satellites on orbit that I want to be able to bring into the operational domain. And so I reconstitute a failed satellite or a destroyed satellite or a satellite that was attacked by another satellite that was on orbit. That would be the easier way to reconstitute than to do it from the ground. That said, as the world has changed, then we ought to be able to take advantage of that. And we need to be able to take advantage of that. And then you can throw that into your overall doctrine to make that a part of your broader piece of resiliency. And then, again, going back to what Chairman Rogers talked about in one of your earlier questions, which was really, how do you want to consider resiliency and mission assurance? And so I think that becomes part of that calculation.
Part of that mission assurance envelope that you look at.
If I could, though, I do want to take a moment to shamelessly plug a couple of things the Air Force is doing.
Not allowed.
Okay, to get after what Adrian was talking about. So in the not too distant future, I think later on this fall, maybe it's early winter, we'll be running a space pitch day. So the Air Force ran an Air Force pitch day where they put a number of things on contract in as little as 3 minutes. And so we are looking to do something similar in the space world. So, Adrian, those good ideas, ensure that those folks are working their way through the process so they can contribute to Space Pitch Day. And I would expect that we will put several $1 million of small contracts together in a very, very short period of time. We've got the Space Enterprise Consortium, which I think you're all familiar with. And we've got the other transaction authority that's the contract mechanism there. It certainly isn't perfect, but we have reduced, the normal contract time by about 50%, and so it's still too long, to your point. But I think what that does for the Air Force is it gets us thinking about what if. And helping us understand, if I can do this in 90 days today, if I could reduce that to 20 days, what would that mean? If I could reduce that to 5 days, what would that mean? And so we're hoping to be able to put as much as about $2 billion on that OTA that would then be available to any number of programs. It's not $2 billion that's set aside, it's a $2 billion contract ceiling that would then allow Dennis Bythewood at SMC, who's trying to build the next OPIR constellation, to say, how can this consortium contribute to that?
So for those of the audience for whom Space Enterprise Consortium is not yet a household name, can you just give a little description of it?
Yeah, so it's a consortium of 300 companies, about 75% of which are what we would call non-traditional. So they're not, the companies that would roll off my tongue. They might, Adrian, roll off your tongue and folks. So I think about 75% there, and it is an ability to basically get on contract very quickly, relatively quickly, very quickly from an Air Force standpoint, onto a small problem set that a program manager out at SMC might have.
So I want to get to audience questions. Before we do, just very briefly in a kind of a lightning round fashion, if there are any parting thoughts, Adrian, open up the aperture to over-the-horizon capabilities. If there are any of those kind of things you want to throw out or any final foot stomping, let's go down the line. Adrian?
There you go.
The clock is running.
Yeah, no, so thank you again. Really, for us, we've been working with customers for 9 years. We have to be profitable as a company. We don't have the luxury of massive investment or a lot of venture capital backing us. So we've had to be profitable. Everything that we've built, from the first commercial airlock on the International Space Station to our smallest experiment for a high school in Indiana, everything that we've built was on the back of revenue that we have earned. So our approaches, as we take them, as we discuss them with you, and kind of the pie in the sky things that we're looking at are built with customer service in mind first. Whatever the requirements of the customer are, so long as it is within our engineering capability to fulfill those requirements, as odd as they may sound, we will achieve that mission. With respect to upper stages and space platforms in the future, really our motivation for doing that is to provide a platform for those customers to achieve their ends. We've worked with well over 150 customers by this point. We've seen so many good ideas that we just want to enable. Power, data, telemetry, give them the capability to succeed, give them the access to where we are on orbit via launch, and we'll see the burgeoning, we hope, of an extraordinary future in low Earth orbit and beyond.
Thanks, Adrian. Lars.
Yeah, so I'm just going to touch on briefly why this is important and how important is this. And Chairman Rogers did a really nice job earlier of pointing out some of the threats and the risks to our current architecture in space. So why is it important? It's important to not only our national security, but global commerce. So it's absolutely essential. It's absolutely critical to our daily way of life, not just America, but around the world. So how important is this? It's absolutely critical and essential to our way of life. So what should we be doing about it? You know, it's important to robust our architecture, to make it more resilient, to be able to defend this architecture both on a daily operational basis and if there's any risks or threats to it. And so what's a good model for considering that? We might want to look at our nuclear triad. How important is our nuclear triad to us? And how do we build up a very robust and resilient nuclear deterrent capability to preserve the peace over the last 70 years? And we might want to look at space in a similar way, where you have multiple different elements of that architecture that provide that resilience and robustness that make it almost self-defensible. And it's able to withstand any kind of threats, whether they be a solar storm or whether they be some sort of human-induced impacts. So it's that important, and it's how we think about this in trying to move forward and build a more robust and resilient architecture that's absolutely critical to both our national security and global commerce. And so all of these things that we're talking about are enablers to help us move that direction. So I just wanted to kind of share some thoughts and context on that.
Thank you, Lars. Jeff?
I want to take a little bit of a different tack in my comments. I want to talk about this new space and, can you hear me? New space and we'll call it traditional or old space. And I've been in the space business for a long time. I've worked in traditional space. I've worked in new space. This is really a team sport. I worry that those terms, while they may be good marketing tools and they excite people, I'm in new space, it's going to require the cooperation of a lot of enterprises for the United States to succeed in its national security and its civil and its commercial space programs. And so I worry a little bit that we're using these terms to divide. We're happy to work at Virgin with big companies, little companies, middle-sized companies. You can call yourself what we want. We think that's ultimately going to redound to the benefit of our customers. And, guess what? I think some of the new space companies aspire to eventually become more traditional space companies. I remember when Orbital was a startup company. I remember when SpaceX was a startup company. I think they have twice as many people now as the Boeing Lockheed joint venture they compete with. And so I worry that those terms are a little bit meant to divide our community. Certainly, there are attributes of being in a new space company where you're leveraging commercial, you have perhaps a more entrepreneurial bent, and we certainly like to think that. But I think ultimately particularly in the national security community, it's going to require a lot of enterprises working together, regardless of what you call us or how you label us. And so that's where we're focused.
I think that's great perspective to bring to this, and I wish I'd said that earlier. Thank you, Jeff. So, Sean, you're hitting cleanup here.
Yeah, thanks. So the first 5.5 decades of U.S. experience in space, the national security apparatus was really absolutely in the driver's seat. And it served well for the environment that we were in. That has changed dramatically, and frankly, I am a huge fan of that. Now, the key is we don't want to necessarily just take our hand off the stick. We still need to have a role in guiding and determining where the future goes, but we don't need to be in a place where we drive all technology development. The strength of this nation is the entrepreneurial spirit that you see up here. It is that will keep us in front of our adversaries. And so I, for one, am extraordinarily excited about where we stand, and I think where we're going.
What he said. I have in my hand more questions than we'll have time to get to. Not just more questions, but more really good, great questions. But some of us will be around, time, schedules permitting, and would be happy to interact afterwards. But let me start in kind of a first in, first out basis. I studied enough accounting to remember that. And just to get to more questions, I think we'll just maybe have one or two people and then go to the next one. So anyone, this is up for grabs for any of you, and I guess we'll give you a break on this one, Sean. You'll see why. So if you could direct any provision in the NDAA to ease acquisition, to go fast, to better integrate commercial capabilities, what would that be? Next question.
You touched on other transaction authority earlier, and I've seen it work. It works well. It's a bit of a Band-Aid. It's actually been around for a long time. It's just become more popular recently. But maybe a provision that makes it easier. Our contracting officers are constrained by the DoD 5000 FAR. So if there was something similar to that allowed them to almost write a check or sign a contract as easy as we do with our commercial customers, then that would certainly open up commerce and open up the activity, like Chairman Rogers was mentioning earlier. Increasing the cadence of launch or on-orbit activity is really going to be what brings in industry and what gets them excited about innovating and competing in that marketplace.
So maybe something that scales OTAs.
Yeah.
Brian, I think we're at a critical moment in time where there is obviously a lot of private investment coming into the space business. And I think it's a precious moment in time. And so I think it would be useful to ensure that the government was encouraged to capitalize on these commercial space capabilities to the greatest extent possible. Now, what that means we can talk about, but it would be useful to have that as a policy statement, not as a mandate, not as a program direction, but something that it would be the policy that the government should be doing that.
And we have that, for instance, in a very narrow area of imagery, to the maximum extent practical.
So broadening that across the community.
Okay, so we spared you, Sean, but not now, because you had mentioned almost in passing, so I was intrigued by this too, the potential that the government may at some point need to protect commercial satellites. So Adrian and others talked about over-the-horizon technologies. This is, I don't know if it's an over-the-horizon policy issue, but could you just unpack that thinking a little bit for us?
Yeah, so initially where I think we would want to focus is where are those commercial capabilities providing a clear, distinct national security activity? supporting a national security activity. That happens today in SATCOM, right? So I mean, there's a lot of our strategic communications, not nuclear communications, but a lot of our communication occurs over commercial satellites. So where there is a very clear national security interest, I think that there's an element there that we want to focus on. I think if you look larger, you start to think about, what does the nation and the economic vitality depend on? And if there is a dependence on space capabilities, is there then a responsibility for the Department of Defense or Homeland Security or others to provide some element of security and safety there?
So not unlike in the cybersecurity policy world, the need to protect critical infrastructure.
That is correct.
We had a couple questions about debris. So everyone's kind of worried out here and in the community about having a lot of space junk that's going to make our lives more difficult. And I think it touches again on the regulatory element of, do we need a new regulatory framework that in part can handle debris from constellations in the thousands potentially? Any thoughts on that for the audience? Or what we need to do further, or what are we doing now?
Yeah.
Maybe we've got a handle on it.
Yeah,
Lars?
orbital debris is it's a problem today, and it's a concern certainly as we're going forward. We're talking about sending up thousands of satellites into low Earth orbit. So it's a problem that needs to be addressed. Our company has thought ahead on this, and we're very responsible all the way through the whole launch experience, where we don't leave anything on orbit except for the actual spacecraft. And many of those are within the regulatory requirements to deorbit within a set period of time and then not remain as orbital debris. And we don't leave anything on orbit that can add to the orbital debris problem. However, looking forward, there's other participants in the business that are not as responsible, other countries that maybe aren't as responsible. And just by the act of that much activity going to and from low Earth orbit and other orbits, there's going to be more and more of an orbital debris problem. The problem with the orbital debris problem is there's not an incentive for industry to go up there and collect it. It's not like you can go up and collect debris and go recycle it and make some revenue from that. And so, who's going to take on that responsibility? It may become more of a government or international challenge or responsibility to go up there and ensure that we maintain the space environment for commerce and for other uses that support national security and other objectives. And so there is an incentive for governments to go up and clean up or maintain the environment, just as they have been through the current protocols, the current regulatory standards. There may be a need to go up there and be more active in terms of cleaning the environment and maintaining the environment, just as there's been some discussion about going up and policing the environment.
And if I may, I mean, we've had to do orbital debris assessments for over 250 satellites at this point, so we're familiar with that. We respect that. Completely agree that kind of the regulatory limitations or really strong suggestions, I think would be a more appropriate term for what they are today, are the right kind of way to move. And to be clear, respecting those things makes us better as an industry. It makes us stronger to have to build in the capability, if you are not in an orbit that naturally deorbits within a set amount of time, to figure out how to deorbit your satellite. That is a capability that not only has repercussions for figuring out how to deorbit, but the capability of the satellite itself within its usable life. I mean, who wouldn't want to maneuver into different orbits?
And we've kind of
we're on board.
Bumped up against a related question, and that is, are we at the point where we are going to have to do a better job of deconflicting potential launch and air traffic? And are we thinking ahead to that?
Yeah, and doing so, and to the point I just made, deconflicting air traffic made air traffic control technology better. And today, we're doing it like it's not even a big deal. So why can't we reach the same point with orbital debris? It's forcing us to build technologies to make the whole industry better.
We're also doing an air traffic control system for drones, too.
Yeah,
got a lot of work here. If
yeah,
anybody's
that's
in
work
the young folks want to be in the air traffic, space traffic control, boy, we've got a future for you.
Yeah.
And I think we're kind of bumping up against our time. How are we for the timekeepers? How are we doing? Two more? All right, okay. So here's a question that used to have some of us back in the day wringing our hands at NRO. We'd start talking about the vulnerability of on-orbit assets, but what about the vulnerability of assets on the ground that are critical that can't, they can't go to a higher delta V, get out of the way. So are we in this whole reconstitution realm? Are we? And I guess Sean would start with you. Are we bringing this into our calculus, our facilities?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's everything from the physical security of any particular asset to the cyber security of the network to whether or not I want a homogeneous or a heterogeneity within my network. To what does my operating system look like? Lots and time and energy are being put toward that. Lots of opportunities to be able to look at both commercial as well as international sovereign networks, but also making sure that we understand what their vulnerabilities are and that they don't inadvertently introduce another threat vector. Very, very important.
Yeah. I think this is really what I'll call a systems level problem, the space, the launch, the ground segment, and so that's really what it is. On the other hand, I worry about using that term as a substitute for we're not going to do anything until we solve the problem on a systems basis, and that I don't think is wise. I think we're going to need to build toward the capabilities so that there's comprehensive resiliency throughout the space architecture. But we can get started on some things now, avail ourselves of commercial capabilities, figure out ways to improve them over time so that they can indeed be, militarily, resilient, if you will, and build ultimately toward the system being resilient rather than just waiting to get started.
Okay. Now, here's a welcome question, especially for a panel that has 4 out of 5 gray heads on it. And it's a kind of a generational question.
It's coming. I don't think so.
You're working on it. How do we really think proactively about pulling the future generation into the space enterprise and to open ourselves up to different ways about thinking about these issues from people who are looking at it, who are used to, grew up with technology that makes us, makes our eyes water now?
Yeah, I think that's really a great question for industry, but I'll be happy to give you my personal opinion as well.
Let's start with it. All right, let's start with industry.
Well, I mean, it's apropos on the 50th anniversary of the launch of Apollo 11. These are for some of us on the panel here. We kind of remember that event. And it shaped our lives. It inspired us. It inspired a whole generation of people to study the STEM subjects. And so, we're trying to find, well, what is it that's going to inspire the next generation? I was encouraged by what I saw at SpaceX. We had a very robust intern program. We had like 25,000 applicants for 1,000 intern positions each year. We used to joke that it's harder to get in there as an intern than to get hired on full time, and that certainly was your gateway to get hired in full time. At least that's the advice we gave everybody. And so we're trying to build up a similar intern program at Rocket Lab because there's a hunger for that. We've got a couple of interns with us this summer, and we just give them the projects, and they dive right in, and they love the challenge. And these are the toughest problems that our society faces, honestly, from a technology perspective. And there's a lot of other elements of these problems as we venture beyond Earth to the moon and further that are going to be incredibly challenging for future generations. So it's exciting for the younger generations to come in and try and tackle these problems, just like it was for all of us to tackle some of these problems early on in in our experience coming up through school and then into the workplace. So there's no better way to inspire them than to challenge them and give them the opportunity to go and try. Watching some of the Apollo 11 documentaries, they talk about the average age of the people sitting at console in the mission control there was like 29 years old. I mean, these were a bunch of 20-somethings in there, and they got us to the moon and they got us back. So that's pretty awesome. I saw the same thing at SpaceX, and I'm seeing the same thing at Rocket Lab. It's very exciting.
Might I venture? Yeah, I think I got to respond to this one, but
as a youngster,
as a young guy. No, but one of the points that I keep harping on is, listen, I'm not a space guy. You look at my resume. I'm not from the space industry. I'm not an engineer. I hail from the State Department. I have 5 years of experience there working on various issues, none of them space. And so what I would encourage folks to realize is, listen, this industry goes beyond just engineering. It goes beyond just building a better rocket engine or figuring out a way to pressurize a module more when it's in space, or working with astronauts or being an astronaut. That's all great, and we want to encourage STEM. Absolutely, that is the right way to go. But for our policy folks out there that are interested in the legal repercussions of an evolving policy climate, UN, international law, project management, there's so much in the space industry, so many gaps that remain unfilled because people look at the industry and say, well, I guess I got to be an engineer, so I'm going to give up on that dream. Listen, I'm just a nerd, right? And one day I just decided that I need to live with more, nerds and more science in my life, and I was able to change that. So if you're in that world, if you're interested in kind of touching on these issues, don't give up on space. Make this your career. We definitely, it's the only time I'm going to say this, we need more lawyers. We need more folks in that yeah, right, wrong panel. In that realm. So yeah, go forth and find your way in.
Yeah, all the problems we face here on Earth, we're going to face on the moon. We're going to face on Mars. So
absolutely,
it takes everyone.
But never say, I'm just a nerd. Wear it proudly. Show your colors. I think this will be the last one, with apologies to those who still have questions unanswered. But again, we welcome you forward. And this one kind of is cross-cultural, perhaps, to some of the things we've been talking about, and challenges us. So, and it's put in the form of a, do you agree with this phrase or not, or the statement or not?
You're not going to make us raise our hands, so are you?
No. Okay, quote, until the USG funds many, meaning dozens per year of small sats with dedicated launches by small launch vehicles, the industry won't see substantial change. How do you react to that?
If that's true, then I think we'll have failed.
Yeah, I agree with Sean. I mean, we're counting, in some respect, on the market moving in this direction and the military being able to leverage that. If all we do is direct the military or the government to fund these, I don't know why they couldn't do that on their own. I mean, if they found that there was capability there. So
okay. Well, I lied. We got one other question. It's too good not to ask. It's just happens to be next, and then this will be the end of our formal panel. When it comes to commercial satellite business, how do we build in cybersecurity? So the government has very stringent procedures, requirements on certain national security launch systems. How do we think about cybersecurity when it comes to being able to capitalize on a commercial industry that doesn't have to build quite to those standards? Any thoughts on the approach towards?
Yeah, the same protocols and best practices that we follow for all IT systems and all technology, we would apply towards systems that are going into space, and the cybersecurity is no exception. It is quite challenging on Earth, and it will be quite challenging in space. And we talked earlier about the various nodes. It's a critical infrastructure, and it's only as secure as its weakest node. And so you have to make sure that you're covering all bases there, both physical security and cybersecurity. But a lot of the best practices that we've learned to secure our networks on Earth will apply in our space as well.
And just building upon that, NIST, National Institute of Science and Technology, has a set of best practices that I think, not just in the space business, that all industries should be looking at and gradually evolving to over time.
You know, I think from the government standpoint, it's a good news story from my perspective in that I don't have to convince the commercial world that they have a problem here. Everyone knows that it is a contested cyber domain. It's contested every day, hundreds of thousands of times a day, and the commercial world knows that it's in their interest to do something about it. The only piece that I would say is it is not just about my network in space. It's also about my supply chain, and it's a deep and challenging issue.
Well, thank you. So you guys have just been an incredible panel with handling wide-ranging topics and questions. And audience, you've been fabulous with your questions and your patience and attentiveness. So thank you all. Thank you so much for doing this.
Very quickly, on behalf of Chairman Rogers, Jamil Jaffer, Representative Nye, I want to thank the panelists for joining us. Thank you for coming to this event today. To follow up, we are going to be building off of the success of Phase 1 and the report into Phase 2, so I strongly encourage you to take a look at the report on the CSPC website and stay tuned for more upcoming events. But thank you very much again for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, we got to get the mics. All right.